Hello, ahoy. Ahoy. I feel like I'm just eternally carrying too much stuff. Yeah, thank you. Ooh. Get your phones out, because we're going to play a game. Also, get ready for this. Blaine's very excited about this. Blaine made this design for, guess what? We're doing something on the 15th. What are we doing? May 15th. Yeah. It's Micah Tyler concert. What's it called? Ooh, look at that. Yeah. So, these are the things, this is what's at stake. We have the number's back there, right? Number is up on the screen. If you are texting me right now, you're again going to go to the back of the line on the list. So, yeah, so when you text this, you show up at the very top, but then if other people text, you go down to the bottom. So when I'm looking for who has done it first, I'm looking for who, when they answer it, the first answer that comes up correctly, that's the one that I'm seeing first. Got it? So, but if you go down to the bottom of the line, I'm not going to see you first. You just stay down at the bottom if you've texted me already. All right. So here's how it works. You type that number in your phone. I can't see who is answering and who is not answering, so I'm just going to yell out the answer with yell out the number who has texted me the right answer. And so you want to type that in and get it ready because we're going to ask you some questions. You can Google it. You can look it up. If you know it immediately, you're just gonna be the one that gets it right first. But you can Google it and look it up. If you have a fastest Googler in the West, you can get them to help you look it up. But whoever answers it correctly first, we're gonna get 3 people up here, and then we're gonna play a game for one of these prizes: the renewal mug or the Boundless T-shirt for the Micah Tyler concert. Are you ready? Well, that's like kind of enthusiasm that I like. Are you ready? Yes. Are you ready? Okay, that's not much better. All right. Here we go. What current Astro has the best batting average as of right now? I just looked it up. As of right now, current Astro, best batting average, 1, 2, 3, go. Current Astro, best batting average. This is the first one. Nolan Ryan, fun fact, no longer plays for the Astros. It's not Jose. I'm assuming you mean Altuve. Who is... 409. Will, yes. Okay, Will had time. Did you know that already? Did you know that? Okay, Will had time to type. Who is it? Tell us who it is. Gurriel, yes. Think about how to pronounce it. Yuli Gurriel, La Pina. Will had time to let autocorrect type hurried for you, and then type Gurriel with an asterisk, and you were still the first one that got it right. All right. Question. It's not Moises Alou. That was a long time ago, too. A lot of people said Moises Alou. No, I'm talking about somebody who's playing right now. Yeah, this season. Sorry. Not all time. I should have been more clear. Will got it. All right. Google got it. What was the number 1 song in January, February of 1968? 1968. January, February, 1968, number 1 song. Number 1 song, February, January, 1968. Who can Google it fastest and type it in fastest? Somebody thinks they got it. It's not Staying Alive. It's not Hey Jude. 68. It's not Hello Goodbye. It's not Hello Goodbye. Still not Hello Goodbye. We're going to give you more. 1968. It's not a Beatles song. It is a Monkees song. It's a Monkees song. I'll cite my sources. This is according to Billboard's Top 40. not Michael Powell. It's not heard it through the grapevine. Google might have messed us up on this one. Okay, start over. Oh, wait. No, somebody got it. Somebody got it. Right when I said start over, somebody texted this. Lucas, yeah, okay, you can come up here. Blaine, can Lucas have a few minutes off to come up here and play a game? Because he's supposed to be filming stuff right now. Okay. What's the answer, Lucas? Did you just guess a monkey song? I'm a believer. Did Google tell you that?
It did.
Okay, Google told him that.
Scroll down to the third or fourth website.
Okay, yeah, but he found it on Google. I'm not crazy. All right, here we go. I need one more person. Who was the winner of American Idol in 2020? I don't know who this person is. I had to Google this. Hey, I had to stop asking sports questions because people were like, I don't know sports. And so I ask American Idol questions. They're like, ooh. I didn't even know it was still a thing. Okay. We're sure it's not Tom Brady? It's not Tom Brady. Who is, somebody got it right off the bat, so you knew this. You knew this. I don't think you even Googled it. Who is that? Do you want to admit it? Yes! You didn't want to get up at first. Did you know it? Did you?
No, I threw out a random name. I seen it on
Really?
Yeah.
You just guessed from like memory?
I seen it on Facebook.
Are you like are you like one of those photographic memory people? Okay. All right. Tyler, Lucas, and Will, all guys up here. Ladies, step up your game. All right. Here we go. We're gonna practice buzzing in.
Who was it?
Oh, what?
Lane Hardy.
Lane Hardy. I don't know if is that a girl or a guy. I don't know. It's a guy. It's Laine. So I couldn't tell. Okay. We're gonna practice. But doing the thing we do, you gotta put your hands behind your back. You know how this goes. Buzz in. Tyler, big time. Except buzz in. Ooh, that was closer. Buzz Lightyear. Bumblebee Tuna. Buzz in. Ooh, who is that? Just barely Will. Will, you have practice because we used to do this in the student ministry. I didn't say that. Buzz in. Tyler's just like, I'm clapping. I don't care what's happening. Okay. So, here we go. This could also be an issue if you don't know this. Name, this is recently in our Acts study. I should be telling you. But you've read the Bible before, right? Okay. Recently in our Acts study, who did Paul stay with in Corinth? Name one person that Paul stayed with in Corinth. You have multiple options.
Solomon.
Good guess. Anybody else want to take a guess? You're about like 1,200 years off. 1,000 years off. You got nothing? We're positive it's not Tom Brady. Anybody in the crowd want to help him? Who did Paul stay with in Corinth? Priscilla and Aquila. So that was just hilarious. I wish Hunter and Chris had made it up here because Hunter, with complete confidence, just yelled, Patricia! And then Chris just said gibberish. He's like, there's people, I know it was. Also, you could have said Titius Justus, which is who he went from the synagogue to his house. Anyway, never mind. All right, here, this one's a little bit easier. Name one city that has appeared on the missionary journeys thus far.
Athens.
Athens is correct. Will, would you like the renewal?
Sure.
Okay.
I don't drink coffee.
The shirt. You don't drink coffee? Well, I commend you for that. So this will still be up for grabs. We'll put this in a place of honor over here. Remember this for next time. Remember also that, like, the final question is not going to be nonsense. It's going to be something that we were looking at. So we are in Acts. We're in Acts for next time. If you want to be reading up on Acts chapter 19 next time, we're in the very end of Acts chapter 18 tonight. So if you remember, we've come thus far to the end of the second missionary journey. We've seen Paul in Corinth and the vast amount of time that he spends there. We saw his interaction with the proconsul at the behest of the Jews that were inciting the Roman authorities against them because they were responding negatively to some of the things that Paul was saying, which we've seen so far. Paul's mode of operating seems to be he goes to these new places. He finds the people who are worshiping the God of the Old Testament. He goes to a synagogue. If there's not technically a synagogue there, he'll go to where people are praying by the river, like he did in Philippi, and that's where we see the conversion of Lydia and then her whole household. Probably the house churches in Philippi begin meeting in Lydia's house. And so we see that happen over and over and over again. We see the opposition of Jewish leadership. Remember, when we hear that term Jews, especially in the New Testament, we're not seeing the Jewish religion in a negative sense at all. What we're seeing is Jewish leadership responding negatively to their power dissipating when Paul comes in and preaches the gospel and people respond to it. And so they, like Gentiles in other places, like we're going to see in Ephesus, respond negatively to some of the things that are the result of Christianity being preached, proclaimed, accepted, and changing the world around it. Right? People are responding negatively to that because they like the way things are. Jewish leadership is part of that. So Thessalonica, we have one of those harsh responses of Jewish leadership, and when we get to Berea, we have Luke describing the way that the Jews accepted the gospel there, being more noble than other people had accepted it because they look at the scriptures, they examine what Paul is saying about this Jesus and about how the Old Testament has talked about him since the beginning of time, and so they are able to see from a rational standpoint, this is what all of these Old Testament prophecies are pointing to. And so Luke describes that very positively. And so when we get to these more, especially in Greece, we're shifting from the end of the second missionary journey to the third missionary journey, which we're going to really start focusing on Ephesus and Asia Minor there. So when we go from Corinth, we're going to see this little recap at the very end of this very quick recap of Paul's journeying at the very end of the second missionary journey, the beginning of the third one. He's in Corinth. Then he goes to Ephesus for a little bit. Then he takes the trek back down to Caesarea and Jerusalem and back to Antioch. And then from Antioch, he goes on the third missionary journey. He's going to go through the southern regions. I think the scholars are going to argue whether it's northern Galatia or southern Galatia. I think he's going to churches he's started already. Southern regions of Galatia and Phrygia, and then he's going to end up back in Ephesus by the time we get to the beginning of chapter 19 next time. So that's just a precursor for next time. But we're going to be in Ephesus for a little bit here, and we're going to see some things. As Paul is going along, he has these new companions with him, Priscilla and Aquila, and they stay behind. We're going to see their interaction with this new teaching that comes along. So let's look at Acts. Take a deep breath. We just went through all the background. Let it out. I can feel the weight off of you. Acts chapter 18, starting in verse 18. Acts chapter 18, starting in verse 18. After this, and the after this is everything that we talked about last time. There's been a little gap since we've been there. So Justin was here and did a great presentation on resurrection apologetics last time. But the after this that he's talking about is when he's taken before the tribunal. Gallio doesn't charge him at all, but the people are still angry and they're still take one of the synagogue rulers out and beat them. This is the after this. Paul stayed many days longer. Now we're talking about Corinth. How long was Paul in Corinth? Anybody remember? A year and a half, that's right. So that's the question I should have asked probably. A year and a half. He's a year and a half in Corinth. Many days longer. Some people think is included in that, maybe after that. So maybe he's even staying longer in Corinth. Then took leave of the brothers. That's everybody. That's the gathered body, the brothers. So it would be also brothers and sisters. And set sail for Syria, and with him Priscilla and Aquila. At Cenchreae, he had cut his hair, for he was under a vow, and they came to Ephesus. We'll talk about the vow later, but they come to Ephesus. He left them there, so he leaves Priscilla and Aquila there, but he himself went into the synagogue and reasoned with the Jews. When they asked him to stay for a longer period, he declined. But on taking leave of them, he said, I will return to you if God wills, and he set sail from Ephesus. So Paul comes to Ephesus with Priscilla and Aquila, leaves Priscilla and Aquila there, and leaves Ephesus himself. When he had landed at Caesarea, that's when he sails from Ephesus, and we can put that map back up there when we're going through some of these. When he had landed in Caesarea, he went up and greeted the church, and then went down to Antioch. Now, when he greets the church, he's probably going to Jerusalem. We're going up to Jerusalem, right? When we say we went up, we're going up to Jerusalem, even though we're going north on the map after that to Antioch because the Temple Mount is in Jerusalem. Every direction from Jerusalem is down. So he went down to the church at Antioch. After spending some time there, he departed and went from one place to the next through the region of Galatia and Phrygia. And so this is probably that southern region. This is the second missionary journey. We're not talking about the third one yet, but he's beginning the third one after he leaves Antioch. Antioch is the sending region. He's beginning the third missionary journey, going through some of the same regions on this map, strengthening all the disciples. We'll talk about what that means when Paul is doing this, when he keeps up this relationship that he has with these churches. Verse 24. Now, we had a little aside, right? That was a little aside telling us all of the places that Paul had went and gone. And now we're going back. We're saying this is what was going on in Ephesus. Now, a Jew named Apollos, a native of Alexandria, came to Ephesus. He was an eloquent man, competent in the scriptures. He had been instructed in the way of the Lord, and being fervent in the Spirit, he spoke and taught accurately the things concerning Jesus, though he knew only the baptism of John. He began to speak boldly in the synagogue, but when Priscilla and Aquila heard him, they took him aside and explained to him the way of God more accurately. And when he wished to cross to Achaia, which is where the region of Greece where Corinth would be, the brothers encouraged him and wrote to the disciples to welcome him. When he arrived, he greatly helped those who through grace have believed, for he powerfully refuted the Jews in public, showing by the scriptures that the Christ was Jesus. And so here's where we begin to see some really cool things. We've seen some really awesome things happen in Acts so far. But here's when we begin to see some really cool things happen with the early church as these believers. We're going to see some interaction with Paul and people who disagree with him. We're going to see some interaction with Paul and some people who need some further instructions, that they have some things right, but they don't have it quite yet. There's this incompleteness either to what they believe or what they're teaching. And we see the response of the early church to that. We see the response here first of Priscilla and Aquila, but then later we have a really good record of what Paul thinks of Apollos because we have the Corinthian correspondence. Apollos ends up in Corinth, and Paul begins to speak at the beginning of Corinth when he's talking about divisions, right? When he's mentioning people say, I belong to Paul or I belong to Apollos, right? This is the Apollos that he's talking about. And so when we see that come up, this is the subtext behind that there was this interaction that the early church had with other believers that they didn't know them until they came and started teaching and speaking. And so there was this spread of Christianity. If Apollos is from Alexandria, where is that? Not Louisiana, Southeast Texans, right? Egypt, right? We're talking North Africa, right? The famous ancient city of Alexandria, known for philosophy and for teaching and for the knowledge that was contained there, but also there was a large Jewish community there. One of the districts, probably 1.5 of the districts of the entire city, largest cities in the region, was Jewish. And so Apollos coming from Alexandria, we don't know when he heard what he had heard about the gospel, but there was some spread of the gospel throughout the world by this time. Christianity had been around for several years. And so there's this opportunity for the message to spread, and there's now opportunity for the praxis, for the things that it takes to follow Jesus to have spread. And so some of these communities now are coming into contact with each other for the first time, and this is one of the stories that we have. So let's back up. Before we meet Apollos, we have this all of this happens pretty quickly, right? Is this jarring to anybody else? All of the things that it says, all the places that it says Paul goes. Basically, we've included an entire missionary journey in this 1 or 2 sentences, this entire trip around the Mediterranean that we've spent chapters and chapters previously in Acts talking about. And I think the reason for that is, I think the reason for the quickness is we're getting back to what's going to be the central place for the third missionary journey, which is Ephesus. We're going to spend years in Ephesus. We're going to spend time there. There's going to be this, again, a correspondence with the Ephesian church that includes other churches, again, other people that we meet along the way. Epaphras likely hears preaching by Paul in Ephesus and possibly starts the church at the Colossian church. And so we see all of those connections begin to be made through all of these places that Paul goes. He goes and he preaches in the synagogue, and either people accept it or reject it. And we have this very intense statement by Paul when he's preaching in Corinth. Well, your blood be on your own heads if you don't accept what I'm saying. I'm going to go to the Gentiles now. I've been tasked to go to the Gentiles. I've had success with the Gentiles. The Spirit is falling on the Gentiles. God is moving among them, and they're going to accept it. And the way that he talks about it in Romans is this was part of the plan. God is using all of this for his glory so that people can come to know him, even though you may be rejecting it right now. And Paul sees that big picture type way, especially when he's talking about the mission of God and what we are called to do. And so when he's interacting with these especially new places, we're going to see Paul keep up that correspondence. Kyle Harper is a historian that actually, one of the ways we can know where the early church spread to is because that's where the churches were. A lot of these churches are still in existence. A lot of the churches that we're talking about here, there's still Christian influence in these places today in the world. That's one of the ways that we track the early church, that there were churches there were people worshiping Christ there for hundreds and thousands of years after that. One of the ways that Kyle Harper tracks Christianity is the ethics that followed the Christian church. And what I mean by that is there is a Roman societal ethic, especially in terms of sexual ethic, how we talk about marriage, how we talk about what happens with our bodies. There is a sexual ethic that followed the Christian church and in these places. And Kyle Harper traces it to the 300s and the 400s. He traces it specifically to the practice of sexual slavery. He says you can track the early church, you can track where the church was prominent by where there were legal bans on sexual slavery. By the places where the church was at, the world changed around them, and it didn't look like the rest of the world anymore because of the spread of the message of Christ, because of this life-changing way that the world took note. And that's what we see happening when Paul goes to place after place and sees this explosion of faith. Sometimes we only see one or two households mentioned. Sometimes we only see one or two individuals mentioned. But we see, especially through his correspondence with these places, that's why I always like to study Acts in tandem with and reading alongside the letters that Paul is writing to the churches. So let's talk about this at the very beginning. Priscilla and Aquila are with him. Where do we meet Priscilla and Aquila? We just talked about it. We meet them in Corinth. Paul stays with them in Corinth. He has the same profession as them. They become his ministry partners, right? And so he meets them because they've been expelled from Rome, as Claudius is expelling the Jews from Rome. And so if we're thinking big picture like Paul is thinking, Paul meets Priscilla and Aquila in Corinth in Greece. They've come from Rome. Paul has come from Antioch. They should not have any interaction with each other, but God has put them in this place together. Meets Priscilla and Aquila. Priscilla and Aquila become his ministry partners. They travel with him to Ephesus. While they're in the midst of this traveling, Paul says, hey, it's a good time for a haircut. Right? Is that what he says? What do we think's happening with this haircut? He's under a vow. What did he say? I promised I would cut my hair. What's he talking about? Some people connect it to the Nazirite vow, which is a vow of cleanliness. It's a vow to stay away from ritual impurity connected to temple worship, which we'll talk about. It's also a vow that involved cutting your hair and not cutting your hair for a time after that. It's a vow that involved staying away from strong drink. Fermented is why they would stay away from it, because, it was this uncleanliness factor that had to do with death and things rotting. So why is Paul doing that? Paul writes to the Galatians, "O foolish Galatians, who has bewitched you?" Why is Paul continuing to follow what seems to be Jewish practice? Well, scholars are going to have several different answers to it. I think we get a really positive response in Ephesus, especially from, including a Jewish setting in the synagogue. We get a really strong response in Ephesus. What happens in Ephesus? He himself went in the synagogue, reasoned with the Jews, and what is their response? They rouse the crowds, right? They bring him before the Roman authorities. They get him stoned. They get him thrown out of the city, right? Is that what happens? You can talk to me. You can say no. That's not what happens, right? They asked him to stay for a longer period. They said, will you please stay? And what does he say? I got some stuff I got to do. No, he declined. And I think he does this for two reasons. Number one, this is why I think it's connected to probably some type of thankfulness for what has happened in Corinth. He does this because Paul is still Jewish, right? He doesn't have this bifurcation of Judaism and Christianity that we have. He sees Christianity as an offshoot of Judaism, right? He knows that we are not saved by works of the law. He knows that we are now under grace, but there's an importance to this. The way that he talks about it, I have become all things to all people that I might save some. He continues to do things in certain contexts that allow him to preach the gospel. He has this really, really positive interaction with a Jewish audience in Ephesus. He leaves them early, possibly because after he's taken this vow, if this is the beginning and not the end of the vow, part of the process was going to Jerusalem. Part of the process was going to Jerusalem to complete the burning of that hair and offering. Not, again, that he's talking about for his salvation. But we see later in Acts, Paul takes a vow as part of temple sacrifices so that nobody is stirred up by the things that he's saying. So he's able, again, he does this at the behest of the Jerusalem apostles. He's able, again, to reach people for Christ. He does what it takes where he goes to be a Jesus person following Jesus and bring as many people along with him, even if it costs him something. He shaved his head. What if I said everybody's got to shave their head right now before we leave? Elliot, you don't count. He raised his hand. I didn't call him out. He raised his hand. You raised your hand. Okay. Stephen would be okay too. He makes inroads to reach the people around him. Again, not sacrificing the meaning or the thrust of salvation by faith through grace. But he does this so that some might come to know Christ. He leaves. First reason, I think he's going back to Jerusalem. He needs to reconnect with the Jerusalem apostles. He needs to complete this vow that he's made. It's part of what he's planned to do all along. And by way of going to Jerusalem, he's going back to Syria. That's what he's doing. He's going back to Syrian Antioch. He's going there because that's the sending place. That's where he's been sent from for all of his missionary journeys. Number two, he knows that he is leaving people there. Who's staying there? Priscilla and Aquila, right? He knows that whatever happens, by the time he gets back, they're going to be in good hands. And we see this story of exactly why he did that later. He set sail from Ephesus. I will return to you if God wills, and God did will it. He returns to Ephesus. Verse 24, this is where we meet Apollos. A Jew named Apollos, a native of Alexandria, came to Ephesus. He was an eloquent man, competent in the scriptures. That could mean the Old Testament scriptures. It could mean, we're going to see a little bit further of an explanation of what it does mean, but at the very least, he is a talented orator. He's a gifted speaker. We go from Paul seemingly leaving the Ephesians to Apollos, this teacher coming in and needing this correction. Now, some people see Apollos negatively. I think we see Apollos in a pretty positive light, especially with the way that it ends. We'll get to that, but I think by the end of this, we're going to see Apollos not as, there is a way that Paul deals with false teachers. There's a way that Paul deals with people that are teaching things that are harmful to the church, and there's a way that they deal with Apollos. There's a difference. We're going to talk about what that is. But Paul sees the bigger picture of what's going on, and he sees what it is to be in community, not just with this place, but baptized into the community of Christ. That's what we're going to be talking about in Acts chapter 19. I think that's part of what we're building to, this unity that all Christians share in the bond of Christ, that we're able to see that it is not something that we have earned on behalf of ourselves. It's something that we receive freely, but it is something that might cost us. Stock market crashed in 1929. Great Depression usually is mentioned from 1929 to 1939. Anybody have grandparents, relatives that grew up talking about the Great Depression, right? Anybody ever heard anybody talk about it? Apparently it was not a good time. People would stand in bread lines like this for hours and hours and hours just to get food. Unemployment went up. And at the height of it, some people say it was almost in the 40s and 50s, but really for a long time into the 30s, it was at least a quarter of the country unemployed completely. And so lines like this popped up all over the country. It's very demoralizing, very dehumanizing. So one of the things that also popped up was what was called penny restaurants. Everything cost a penny. It was cheap even for back then, right? You could buy like a whole loaf of bread, you could buy a bowl of soup, you could buy a gallon of milk, and you could sit there and eat it, and it would cost you 5 cents if you bought 5 things. One of the reasons that these penny restaurant operators decided to do this was to give people who had nothing a way to get it and dignity. That they were actually going in and buying it. It wasn't something that they were standing on the side of the road waiting for hours and hours. It's something that they could go in and enjoy a hot meal with people that they paid for. One of the most famous penny restaurants was Clifton's Cafeteria. Clifton's Cafeterias after this became really famous. The guy who owned them was really eccentric. He put a lot of crazy stuff in it. It looked like a rainforest cafe, but it was like a real rainforest. Like they would like pour, there was a rain hut that you could sit in and he would like pour buckets on people. Like he was looking for ways to build that. It turned into like this cafeteria empire, right? They had like stuffed lions in there. It looked like a 1920s rainforest cafe. There is a Clifton's still in Los Angeles. It's the same Clifton's that was there in the 20s and 30s. I think I have a picture of it. Same one. Clifton's Cabinet of Curiosities. He had other business ventures. It wasn't a wealth-determining thing for him to open these cafeterias. But one sign that he put up when he started these penny diners, these penny cafeterias that you could pay a penny for everything that you ate, he put up a sign that said, "Dine for free unless delighted." You could come in his penny cafeteria. He had all this extra stuff that you could do. In his penny cafeteria, you could eat for free if you so chose. Unless you were delighted was the name of the sign. People thought he was crazy. He was going to go out of business because you could just go in and be like, oh, it's fine. And it's like what we do, right? When you go in and sell somebody it's your birthday, but it's not really your birthday. You just want to get the whatever, don't act like you haven't done that. Okay. Right? You would think people would take, like if I opened a restaurant today and said, dine for free unless you're delighted, I'd be in the business for about 2 hours, right? For like one lunch rush, right? You know what happened? So many people decided to pay because of that sign that they had to open more restaurants. They couldn't contain the people that were in there. Tens of thousands of people decided to pay more than other penny restaurants were paying because they were delighted by the free place. It cost them nothing to get in there, but by the time they left, they had paid into it. That's what Paul is doing. He knows that his salvation comes by faith alone, but he also knows that it is going to cost him to follow, that there is a sacrifice that it takes. We dine for free. Somebody else has paid for our meal. But if we delight, if we're passionate, if we're excited by the gospel, we will treasure the cost that we pay as we follow, as we continue to sacrifice on behalf of people knowing Jesus is what Paul was doing when he gets beat up and thrown out of a city, and he dusts himself off and goes back into that city, preaches again, and then goes to the next city. When he says things like, I consider what's going on right now, these present sufferings, to be nothing compared to the glory that is to be revealed. When he's talking about these things, he's talking in big picture terms that we don't always see. Big picture terms that takes an Egyptian Jew. Go back to the map. We're going to spend a lot of time on the map, and we're all going to like it, right? You're going to like maps as much as me by the end of this. That takes an Egyptian Jew that you can't even see barely. You see that's Egypt right there. That takes an Egyptian Jew from Egypt to Ephesus. It takes these Roman Jews to Corinth, to Ephesus, and puts them all in the same place. And here's what happens. Apollos starts teaching. Because he is this gifted speaker, he knows the scriptures, he's been instructed in some way in the Lord, he's fervent in the Spirit. Scholars are going to argue over whether or not he's saved or not. I think there's a good argument for the way that they respond to him after this, that there is some acceptance that he has already made of the gospel. He's teaching it, he's preaching it. That I think it would have been a very different conversation if he had not already received the Holy Spirit by the time he's doing this, but he only knew the baptism of John, the baptism of repentance that's supposed to prepare the way for this. And so we like these nice big categories, right? We like to say, okay, you got saved here, you get baptized here, and now you're going to serve here, right? We like to do that. Apollos doesn't look like that, right? We don't know what's happening. We don't know the rest of the story, but what we do know is that he becomes this fixture of the church in Corinth. So at some point we know that Apollos has accepted this, that he receives the Holy Spirit, that he likely is baptized. Some people are going to say that he is baptized under the baptism of John, and they take that. I think that the way that we respond in Acts chapter 19 is going to speak to that, so I'll save that conversation for there. But we know that there's something that Apollos is lacking, and we know that from this. He began to speak boldly in the synagogue, but when Priscilla and Aquila heard him, they took him aside. They didn't say it out in front of everybody. They didn't say, hey, hold on, got a problem. They took him aside and explained to him the way of God more accurately. Now, that doesn't look like to me that Apollos is this false teacher coming in teaching a different gospel, teaching something that needs to be quelled immediately, because they let him teach the rest of it, right? But then they come to him. Both Priscilla and Aquila come to him. Priscilla, mentioned first, come to him and teach him, instruct him, explain to him the way of God more clearly. This is huge for the early church. Many times when we come to these new places, we're meeting people like Lydia. We're meeting people like leading women of the city that Paul is able to use in his ministry that is not the way that the greater culture thought about women being involved, especially in religious movements. This is something that's happening here that's different, that even Priscilla and Aquila are able to take on these opportunities for gospel readiness that Apollos becomes the benefactor of. Thank you for leaving the map up there. We see a very small picture if we just focus on our day-to-day. We see a very small picture if I just focus on the things that are ticking me off, or the things that are making me mad, or the things that are making me feel like I have no control over anything. We're going to go through that long list of pictures, Hebert, next, so go ahead. Tell me if you know what this is. What is it? A what?
Magic eye.
A magic eye? What's that? Oh, like a kaleidoscope? Oh, you're talking about the one where you have to like unfocus your. I can never do those. The painting, the things on the wall that are just a bunch of shapes where you're supposed to see something in it. Yeah, nope, that's not what it is. Not a barbed wire fence. It's not a string. It's fabric, right? It is a type of fabric. It is nylon stockings. That's what it looks like super zoomed in. This is from Nikon's Small World Pictures that National Geographic puts on like this a competition for like macro photography where you have to like have something sit, Elliot knows exactly what I'm talking about. You have to have something sit really still for like hours to get this kind of detail in a picture. Keep going. We're going to guess. What's this? It's an embryo of a fish. What kind of fish? No. What? Clownfish. How do you know that? You just took a guess? Yeah. This is that's one of the fish we know because Disney told us about it. Yeah. This is the embryonic stages of clownfish. Keep going. It's not a gecko foot. What? Okay, that's very close. He said a cat tongue. I don't know how you know that. No. This is the tongue of a snail. Snail tongue. Ugh. Why were you okay with cat tongue, first of all, but snail tongue, I don't know. It's the same picture. Okay, next one. DNA? DNA. No. This is, we gotta snort on the front row, okay. This is fungus. Fungus among us. This is filaments and fibers of and spores of fungus. Go to the next one. It is a knot. No, it's not. Okay. A knot of what? Leather? No. No, it's not thread. It's not silk. This is a human hair. You say it? Oh, sorry, I can't hear everybody. It's a human hair tied in a knot. Next. That is a moth. They got it immediately. Okay. That's what a moth. I'm glad I killed them when they get in my house. Don't kill moths, just shoo them out. That would be fine. Okay. All right. Next one. This is skeleton. It's not coral. It's closer than bones, though. It's mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. You're right. It is what? That's algae. Oh, now I know exactly what it is. Okay, next one. Fur. Oh, who said it? Vivian got it immediately. Well, it's a moth wing, but it'll be basically the same thing, right? Under this type of magnification. Okay, last one. This one was, no. Boo. No, don't go back. What is this one? It's not a possum tongue. That would have been awesome. This is what everybody is saying when they cough, and they have to tell people it's not COVID, right? This is what's making you cough. What's making you cough? This is pollen. Pollen under like this intense magnification, something that we see all the time, that affects us all the time, that we just don't understand what's happening. Go back to the map, Hebert. At some point, Apollos from Alexandria hears the gospel. Doesn't understand it fully, possibly comes to an acceptance of it, starts teaching it, starts going places specifically to teach it. He's an eloquent speaker. Saul, persecutor of the church, on his way to Damascus, gets knocked off of his horse, blinded, accepts the very one whom he's been persecuting, becomes this leader, apostle of the early church, goes to all of these places all over the known world, starting these churches, meets Jews that have been expelled from Rome in Greece, travels with them to Ephesus, where they are able to explain the gospel more fully to this guy from Egypt This is crazy. This doesn't happen. This is something that has been pulled together by the working of the Holy Spirit so that we can see the big picture that God is on the move. That He uses people to do it. And that when we come into contact with, we're going to talk about it in more detail in chapter 19, but when we see all of these strands of Christianity come together, we're going to see exactly what happens. We're going to see what happens when people need to be told, that's false. We're going to see what happens when people need to be told, you need to come along with us and learn a little bit more. We see the early church respond to these situations in ways that allow the gospel to continue to be preached and proclaimed. And we see a model for us. We see what it looks like to live in a world that desperately needs Christ, that contains other believers for the purpose of us being connected so that we can be on the mission of God together. That there's something that God's doing, and He's doing it in you, and He's doing it in me, and He's doing it with both of us in conjunction so that we can be on this journey, this pathway. They call them missionary journeys for a reason. The scripture doesn't talk about it that way. It just talks about where Paul went. Right? We got two sentences, and he just does another whole lap. It's a fellowship of movement that takes him from one place to another so that he again can combine his radical obedience with the power of the Spirit. What is God calling me to be radically obedient to this week and respond in the power of the Spirit? Let's pray. Father, I pray that you would open our eyes to see the bigger things that are going on in our world, the things that you have called us to be a part of. God, I pray that this week you would give us the opportunity to explicitly share the gospel with someone. I pray that this week in Beaumont, Texas, we would be in contact with somebody that has been placed here from some other part of the world for the purpose of coming into an interaction with us. That we would stop being small picture people, but we would look at your grand design. We would see that following you causes us to move from where we're at to where you've called us to be. And God, that would be our passion, our drive, and our desire. It's in your Son's name that we pray these things. Amen.